So I said, I want to interview with George Lucas. They said, you can have 1 hour with him. We spent 3.5 hours talking to each other. And Howard introduced me to John Williams, and I said, you know, you and I worked on an album together when I met J.J. Abrams. And he said, Kerry, I wouldn't be in this business if it weren't for your editorials and how they inspired me. You know, I met Robert Rodriguez from Austin, and Robert said, Kerry, that note meant more to me than winning a trophy. This was from the 3 Star Wars movies. And in fact, when I met John Williams, he did a performance at the Hollywood Bowl, and Howard and I went to see it. And Howard, we went backstage afterwards, and Howard introduced me to John Williams, and I said, you know, you and I worked on an album together. I said, and so I said, you wrote some liner notes for the album, and I wrote some liner notes. It was your music. And
can you sit here and tell us about it?
Yes, I can.
That would be better. Hold on a second. Make sure this is good.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you want to talk about. So
this is how the new age of the podcast. There's no structure.
I see.
So it's just perfect because
free form.
It's free form. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the Wolf Pack podcast. We have Kerry O'Quinn here, a man of legendary status. The creator of Starlog.
Is that a good legend or a bad legend?
Well, depends on your outlook, I guess.
That's true. That's true.
If you don't like science fiction or horror or anything cool, you know.
Then what am I worth?
Right, but a lot of people do like that stuff.
A lot of millions worldwide, and I'm just one of them.
And you tapped into the vein of it, and we're going to get into that. And yeah, thanks for thanks for coming to the podcast. And we're here in your amazing apartment, which is also full of history.
Yes.
Right in Hollywood.
In the heart of Hollywood, I can walk to the Chinese theater, to the Egyptian theater, 2 of the classic movie houses, and the Pantages Theater is right down there. And in the summertime, I walk to the Hollywood Bowl for the concerts over there. I love living here because, you know, the Walk of Fame is right down here at the end of the block.
Yeah.
I can walk down the sidewalk and see all the stars in the sidewalk, and quite a few of them are people that I have known and been friends with.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into that. And there, like, some small-time director used to live here. He's like he's an up-and-comer, right?
Well,
I forget his name though. He's like he kind of fizzled out, but he had a lot of promise.
He's had his best days in the past. That's true, but he's still working. Martin Scorsese. This was his apartment when the building opened, and people bought this. Before this was a rental building. People bought the units. It was a co-op. And he bought a 2-bedroom and a 1-bedroom, put them together on the top floor of the building because he loved the views. And that's the apartment I'm enjoying now. And I've been here for over 20 years in this apartment.
But you're from Austin, Texas.
I am from Austin, Texas.
Where I live now.
Hook 'em horns.
Hook 'em. And Austin misses you. You had this amazing house right in Austin. Was it your childhood home?
Well, my dad built the home in 1950. So I was in middle school at that time.
So you built it.
Yeah. So, but I did most of my growth. I stayed there in that house through my 6 years at the University of Texas until I moved to New York at the age of 24.
That's cool. And so you moved to New York like in the 60s.
Starting in the 60s.
So can you tell me about what it was like living in New York then? What did you do and how did it lead into Starlog?
Well, it was kind of a dream of mine. I mean, I had seen, you know, New York in the movies. And to be honest with you, when I was growing up in Austin, Texas, it was not the exciting big city that it is now. It was a small town, not nearly as populated as Dallas or Houston or even San Antonio. Small town. I mean, I think we had less than 250,000 people in Austin in those days. And my dad was city attorney in Austin, and, you know, I knew all the people in Austin and the city manager, the chief of police, blah, blah, blah. You know, I grew up in that, but so I loved when I went to the movies and I saw New York City, the skyscrapers, you know, and Broadway. I loved Broadway shows, you know.
Well, did you see any, like, off the bat, any Broadway shows when you first moved
See
there?
what?
What Broadway shows did you, like, go see first? What was coming out?
Well, when I graduated high school in 1956, as a graduation gift, I mean, I had a girlfriend that her parents gave her a car as a graduation gift. So all my friends got incredible gifts. What my parents gave me was a trip to New York City. And a friend of mine in high school, we were in the same grade, and we had been good buddies and done a lot of things together. And he loved Broadway too. He loved all the shows. I mean, anytime a new album would come out, an original cast album, we would buy it immediately. So we had a lot of Broadway cast albums. And so his parents said that they would pay for him to go to New York with me. Well, guess what? This boy's uncle lived in New York City, and he had a townhouse on East 72nd Street, a 5-story townhouse. And his uncle was John Steinbeck, the writer.
Wow.
So John Steinbeck and his wife were going to be out at their place on Sag Harbor for the summer. And they said we could have their whole townhouse for the 2.5 weeks that we were going to be in New York, complete with a maid and a cook. So
that's wild.
So instead of staying at a hotel or something, which, you know, we could probably not afford to stay for more than about a week, we stayed for 2.5 weeks. And John's wife, Elaine, she knew people at this ticket agency, Mackey's Ticket Agency, and she got us orchestra seats for all the great shows, including things like My Fair Lady, which had just opened and it was sold out for months in advance. And she, lo and behold, got us orchestra seats for My Fair Lady.
That's wild.
The cab driver who was taking us to the theater that night said, "I can't believe you've got tickets for this show." But so we saw a show almost every night we were there. And we saw every musical and a lot of other stuff too. I mean, we just saw, we were Broadway freaks.
That's awesome.
And we had a wonderful time. And of course, we walked the streets, Times Square, you know, we saw New York City, and I was in love with that city. And I said, someday I'm going to come back here.
And you did.
And I did, years later.
And when you came back to New York, were you involved as an ad agency, or what was your career there like? Well,
I had done a lot of interesting things in Austin. I mean, as I said, I was at the University of Texas as a student for 6 years. But I majored in 3 different things. So I was 2 years as an acting major to begin with.
Yeah.
And then I was 2 years as an art major, studio art. And then my last 2 years, I was in commercial art. And I was appointed art director of the student magazine, which was called the Texas Ranger. And it was the largest circulation student humor magazine in the country. It had a larger circulation than the Harvard Lampoon or any other magazine. And I was art director for that magazine. And it was fantastic. And I loved, you know, doing layouts and designing covers and all kinds of stuff. And then I got a job with an advertising agency in Austin that also published a magazine. So I was designing the covers and the layouts for that magazine too. And then I was hired at the Texas Education Agency as part of a big art pool. And I was so good that within a few months, they appointed me as chief artist, and I was in charge of all of the art department there and all the other artists. And they gave me a huge raise. I was making a lot of money until one of my dear friends from Austin, who was in high school with me and made a couple of movies with me on 8mm in high school, he said, Kerry, I've got a job in Dayton, Ohio, designing a season of summer stock theater, one show a week. And he said, I want you to come there and be my assistant designer. And I said, David, I just got this huge promotion and more money than I've ever made in my life. And he got back to me and he said, they've agreed to raise the amount of money they're paying you so that they will match what you're already making, and they will pay your transportation to Dayton, Ohio, and back to Austin or wherever you want to go after that. And I said, will they pay my way to New York? And he said, yes. I said, it's a deal. So I went to Dayton. I spent a whole summer designing one show a week. We did West Side Story. We did The Music Man. We did The Unsinkable Molly Brown. We did all these big musicals that have like 18 sets. And that was a lot of work. I mean, I never left that theater basement. And then at the end of the summer, I went to New York City and I got a job with an advertising firm designing artwork and everything. And then I made a movie in New York, and
a feature,
huh?
Right? A feature film?
No. It was a short film.
A short film.
Yeah.
Cool.
It was a short film, but I was very proud of it. It was we shot it with a widescreen lens, and it was about a 20-minute movie.
8mm, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was 8mm. No. This was actually 16.
Oh, nice.
At that time.
Cool.
And a girlfriend of mine said, she worked for Gray Advertising. She said, they're hiring producers. They said, why don't you take your movie and show it to them and basically apply for a job? And I said, okay. I applied, I was hired, and for the next 2 years, I worked for Gray Advertising, producing all the commercials for Downy fabric softener and everything from gas stations to I don't know. There was a lot of different commercials.
Yeah.
I mean, I really got experience, and I not only in New York, but I traveled to Dayton, Ohio, where I did a commercial with Bart Starr from the sports team, and
was he football or?
Huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just went everywhere. I went to California and I did a bunch of celebrity commercials with Barbara Bain and Martin Landau and what's his name that did The Twilight Zone?
Rod Serling?
Rod Serling, yes.
That's right, yeah.
That commercial that I did with Rod Serling, he just did the voice for it. But, I mean, he had such a strong voice, and it actually won an award.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so it was a huge experience. I mean, I was not only making good money, but I was working with celebrities, and I went to different cities.
It sounds like celebrities across the gamut, from sports to sci-fi legends to, Martin Landau. Like, it's quite a variety.
A lot of variety.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, and then a fellow that had been in a magazine art department. I worked at a magazine company for a while. I was art director for a romance magazine called Intimate Story. And it was kind of
provocative.
Huh?
Sounds a little steamy.
Well, not really. There was like 10 stories every month. And what I had to do as art director, I had to read the manuscripts for every one of these stories every month. And then I had to decide how to illustrate it. And, you know, I had to pick a moment in the story and some of the characters, and then I had to cast it with models, and then I had to hire a director and a location and a studio, and we would go there and we'd shoot still pictures, black and white, that I could design and use in the magazine to illustrate the story. And it was a very successful magazine. Of course, I was basically kind of acting as a producer. I was casting, I was designing, I was, you know, I was doing. It was not just layout work, you know. It was a producer's job. And I met a fella who was from Brooklyn, who was there in the art department. He was kind of fascinated with me because I was from Texas, you know, so I was kind of unusual. And he was, you know, this Jewish boy from Brooklyn, and I was kind of fascinated with him because he was like a character out of the movies, you know. I'd never seen. Anyway, we got to be very good friends. And after Gray Advertising, he called me and said, let's have lunch. And we got together. And to make a long story short, we decided to start a magazine company together. We were going to team up. And we put all the money that we had into a bank account to rent an office and basically start the company. We each put $450 in the bank. So we started with $900. And wow, it was pretty pathetic. But we started the company.
Something.
And we started with a soap opera magazine. Because at that time, there were 16 soap operas on every day, 5 days a week, on the 3 networks. They weren't cable at that time. So 16 shows every week. And, you know, so that's an audience of millions. You know, housewives and people who didn't have jobs, they stayed at home and they watched television in the daytime. And they were huge fans of these shows. They watched them religiously. And so we interviewed the actors, but we also interviewed directors and writers and all kinds of people involved with the production of the show, because all of the shows were produced in New York City, right where we were, except for 3 that were out here in California. There was Days of Our Lives and General Hospital. You know, they were out here in L.A. So I did make some trips out here to the West Coast to interview some of those people. But our soap opera magazine became hugely successful. And we treated the soap opera seriously because no magazine kind of treated that field with the respect that it needed. And they also didn't treat the fans, and they kind of brushed up, oh, they're soap opera fans, you know, the people who have nothing else to do. And I said, no, 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 these are people that are serious about the stories about human beings and the struggles we all have in life and blah, 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 blah. And we for 6 years, we produced that magazine, and it was so successful that eventually the people that, you know, handled the, oh, I can't remember all the names now, but the people who handled all the awards, that there was no daytime television awards. They didn't treat daytime seriously at all. So the only Emmys were for nighttime television. And because of our magazine, suddenly the Academy decided to do a daytime Emmy Awards for the first time. And they had a big...
Really?
Big...
Because of your magazine?
Huh?
Because your magazine took it seriously.
Largely because, yes.
Like, because the articles were, like, giving reviews that
and because we treated the audience seriously, too. And they said, holy cow, there's a serious audience here. It's huge. And this is a serious art form in terms of television. So they had this huge event during the day at Rockefeller Center, right out in front of the golden statue of Prometheus. And they invited our magazine to be there and cover it. And we had photographers and reporters, and we devoted a whole issue of our magazine to the very first Daytime Emmy Awards. And it was so successful, I said, well, you know, Norman, we're making money now. And I said, you know, until we started this, I didn't know anything about soap operas because I work in the daytime, so I don't watch them. But I said, what I love is science fiction. I'm a science fiction fan.
Ding, 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 ding.
I grew up, you know, being inspired by all the George Pal movies, the Destination Moon, The War of the Worlds, When Worlds Collide, all these wonderful movies that showed us the world of tomorrow, and it was more exciting than the kind of ordinary world that I lived in. And I loved that. I said, this is what movies should do. They should show us stuff that's not a part of our everyday life, but show us something that we want to see, that inspires us and that fires us up and makes us want to do things that, you know, we haven't already done. Anyway, so I said, we decided to do a magazine, and I came up with the title Starlog. And we went to our distributor, and they said, there's no audience for science fiction. And I said, well, you know, there really is. I said, but the audience for the science fiction is kind of invisible, but they're out there. And they said, Kerry, you're making money with your soap opera magazine. You start a magazine like this, you're going to lose everything you've earned. So I had to put together a presentation. I got hold of all these people that were part of some of the science fiction fan clubs, which included Star Trek, because Star Trek was off the air at that point, but there were Star Trek fan clubs. And fan clubs in those days, you know, we didn't have cell phones or computers.
What?
Oh, no. Oh, no. This was in the 70s.
Oh, my God.
That's right.
They didn't have no iPhones?
No. No.
I thought they were invented in like 1900.
Sorry, you're wrong.
Man, that American education system.
You're totally wrong. So
what were the fan clubs
The way
like?
the fan clubs got, they would write up these little fanzine letters, and they would mimeograph them, and they would mail them to each other. And that was the way they communicated and kept in touch.
Wow.
Mailing. So I got hold of all this material, all the different fan clubs, and I took it to the distributor, and I said, this is proof that there are fans out there. They're invisible, and they are not respected with a magazine that takes them seriously. But I said, we took the soap opera audience seriously.
Yeah.
Now I want to take the science fiction audience seriously. And they said, all right, we will let you publish this magazine, but you can't do it monthly. You have to do it quarterly, 4 times a year, because you have to see how your first issue sold before you set your print order for the second issue. Otherwise, you'll print way too many copies and you'll lose money. So I said, okay. So we started Starlog, and we put Star Trek on the very first cover. And we did an episode guide to all the original Star Trek series, which was like 2.5 years, 3 years. And it would all, I had, you know, there was Kirk and Spock were on the cover, and the Enterprise and all of that. And lo and behold, the magazine sold pretty damn well. Better than anybody expected except me. I knew it would sell well. So
did you know because you were more connected to the fan clubs, like you had been speaking with people more, you understood the energy, or
and because I was a fan too.
You're a fan too.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I knew all these. You know, one of the ways we gather a lot of the material for that first issue was through fans that I knew and kind of collection stuff that they'd collected.
Yeah.
You know, one of my friends had actually come out here to California, and he met Gene Roddenberry, And he went to the office and he got a bunch of Star Trek stuff. And so I used some of that in the first issue.
That's cool.
Anyway, we started that magazine in 2076, in America's bicentennial year.
1976.
I'm sorry, 1976.
But you are a man of the future. I was just wondering if you like could just revealed your secret that you are from the future.
No.
Gracing us with knowledge.
I love the future, and my heart and soul are there, but my body is here. So anyway, we were doing the magazine. It was still quarterly. And then, lo and behold, the next year, 1977, this guy up in San Francisco named George Lucas came out with a movie called Star Wars. And it was a huge success.
Really?
And it made the cover of Time magazine. And all of a sudden, science fiction was hot. And we were the only magazine that was covering that field.
Wow.
And so immediately our distributor let us go from quarterly to monthly. And when I met George Lucas later on, I told him that I said, you are the guy who let me have a monthly newsstand science fiction magazine.
Wow.
And we were getting letters from fans by the hundreds and thousands. And they said, you know, we love your magazine, but we want to see more. We want to see Dracula, and we want to see Godzilla, and we want to, you know, they wanted all this. I said, that's not really science fiction, that's horror. I said, there's a horror audience out there too. And so I had come up with the name Starlog. Norman and I decided to do a horror magazine. And we tossed around a lot of different names. And one Monday morning, he came in and he said, I've got it. I've got the name. I said, what? He said, Fangoria. I said, Fangoria? He said, yeah. He said, it's got fang in it. That's horror.
Gore.
It's got gore in it. And it's got fan.
Oh, yeah.
I said, Norman, that's great. So we launched Fangoria. And one by one, but the same process, we'd get letters and response from our audience, and they would say, we want this, we want this, we want this. So we started creating magazines, and at our peak, we were publishing 24 monthly newsstand magazines that covered all kinds of topics.
Wow.
And it all started with a soap opera magazine, and then later, this magazine.
That's amazing. That's incredible. And I mean, people probably forget like how influential magazines were. I mean, even I grew up in the 90s, so it was a little before the internet like boom. And as a kid, I would go to the grocery store with my mom and go straight to the magazine section. And I would sit there, and for me, it was Mad Magazine. I would get the new issue of Mad Magazine, and I would just
Alfred E. Newman.
Yeah, exactly. Were you familiar with the Mad people?
Well,
did you interact with
not really, but I loved Mad Magazine too.
Yeah, that was so fun, especially as a kid. But I did kind of miss the Starlog era. But I know, you know, I've like J.J. Abrams, like it was extremely inspirational to
I know.
like generations of like sci-fi.
He said that my editorials in Starlog, I wrote an opening editorial at the beginning of each issue. It's called From the Bridge. And I got to write about anything I wanted to. And I wrote about experiences I had in my life and things that I knew fans would be interested in and would be inspired by and would be motivated by. And sure enough, when I moved out here to LA 20 years ago, and I met J.J. Abrams, and he said, Kerry, he said, I wouldn't be in this business if it weren't for your editorials and how they inspired me. And I heard that from so many other people. I mean, one person once I moved out here, I met everybody in the movie business, you know, and I found out that a lot of them were readers of my magazines and were inspired by them.
It's kind of wild, like, you know, you as on the business side of things, you saw the numbers, not necessarily interacting with all the people that were enjoying the magazines. So it's kind of interesting how, you know, you meet someone like J.J. Abrams and like, did it create a different kind of reality of your impact and your creation?
Well, I mean, I knew that I knew what our sales figures were. I knew we were successful. I knew we had found an audience.
Yeah.
And it was growing.
Yeah.
So I knew that, but I got to meet people that were, you know, I met Robert Rodriguez from Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there's a long story about Robert and his connection to my magazines.
We have time.
He was connected to another magazine I did called Cinemagic, and it was a filmmaking magazine. And we did that for several years, and then I started an annual competition, and it was called the Cinemagic Short Film Search. And I teamed up with the School of Visual Arts in New York City, which had a film department, and the two of us sponsored it, a school and a magazine. And I decided we would have a competition each year, and it would be a short film search, no film over 20 minutes. And I said, we're going to find the best films because these are the filmmakers of tomorrow. And sure enough, we would get literally hundreds of films sent to us. And I watched every one of them every year. And we watched 8mm, Super 8, 16mm, and later, you know, videos. And we would watch them all, and we would pick out the best ones. And then I would rent a theater in New York City, and I would invite several celebrity people to come in to be on stage to hand the trophies to these young filmmakers of tomorrow. And it became very successful. And Robert Rodriguez entered a film one year. And later on, when I went down to Austin, when he was shooting a movie called The Faculty.
I love that movie.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
fun movie.
I went down there to interview him and other people involved with it for Fangoria magazine. And Robert said, Kerry, he said, you don't know this, but, you know, I entered your Cinemagic short film search a couple of years ago. And he said, I got we had a kind of a score sheet for the movies, and we would do the scores. All of us who watched the movies would give it ratings, and we sent that score sheet to everyone who had entered so they'd know how they scored. And he said he got his score sheet back, and there was a little handwritten note at the bottom of the page that said, you didn't win anything this year, but I think you have promise as a filmmaker, and if you keep working hard at it, someday you will make real movies. And it was signed Kerry O'Quinn. And Robert said, Kerry, that note meant more to me than winning a trophy. And so, I mean, that's
awesome. That's an example of how a small gesture from you meant a lot to a young person.
Absolutely. But I could see his talent and his ability, and I knew I meant what I said.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he went on with it and did it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And Guillermo del Toro was another one.
Oh, I'm sure he was all over Fangoria.
Yeah, yeah. We met when I came out here, and we became good friends. When I moved here to LA in 2001, I knew so many people in the field that the various people that were making movies, they said, I guess we need a crazy old man in this role in the movie and that sort of thing. So I got cast in a lot of movies. I did I don't know, almost 20 movies that I've been in since I moved out here. I mean, they weren't big roles. Usually it was a horror movie where I got killed, like Big Ass Spider was one of the movies, and I was the first to get killed in that one. But I enjoyed it, you know. It was great fun.
Big Ass Spider?
Big Ass Spider.
All right, I want to see that.
I have a T-shirt that's a Big Ass Spider.
I want to see that film. Is it anywhere? Is it streaming?
Oh, absolutely.
A Big Ass Spider.
But there's a whole lot of others. I mean, I did a lot of different movies.
We're going to find that. We're going to put the little clip in.
Okay.
Right here.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I was the first guy to die in that movie.
That sounds like an honor.
It's about a Big Ass Spider. I mean,
I would hope so.
It's a horror Fangoria horror movie for sure.
That's cool. So what was it like meeting George Lucas? I mean, it's kind of interesting hearing from like a totally different industry how Star Wars, you know, juiced that up, like science fiction literature or magazine. You know, it's kind of crazy how big that was. Like Star Wars kind of changed a lot of things.
Absolutely.
Not just in film, in many different industries.
Yeah, that's true.
So what, I mean.
Well, and you know, I knew that there was one man behind this movie.
Yeah.
And that was George Lucas. And when Starlog magazine was approaching its 5th year, the 5th anniversary, I said, I want to do a special issue that celebrates 5 years, because you know, it was kind of a miracle that we had actually existed for 5 years and we were doing well. So I said, I want to interview with George Lucas. He's the hero of this field. And I got hold of the publicity lady up at Lucasfilm, and I said, I want an interview with George Lucas. She said, Kerry, I'm sorry, he's not doing interviews. I said, what do you mean he's not doing interviews? He's the most famous guy in the field right now. And she said, no, but People magazine, he turned him down.
Really?
Forbes magazine, he turned him down. He said, he says that all they are interested in is how much money he's making from all these movies.
Probably true.
And I said, well, that's not what I want to talk to him about. But, you know, I tell him that I'm going to fly out there to California. I'm not going to send a writer. I'm going to fly out and do the interview myself because I want to meet him. And she said, Kerry, I'll ask him, but I can tell you right now, he's going to say no.
So he said yes.
3 days later, she called me back and she said, I cannot believe it. George said yes. And I said, all right. So they said, you can have 1 hour with him. So I flew out there. It was before he built the ranch. He was in an office where Industrial Light and Magic was doing their work in San Rafael. And so I met George and we got to talking, and I said, I just got to tell you that when you came out with Star Wars and the X-Wing fighter made the cover of Time magazine, and we had that same picture on issue number 7 of Starlog, I said, it changed everything about my life. I said, we not only went monthly at that point, but I said, you helped me buy my classic 1964 Cadillac Eldorado convertible. And he said, oh my God, you like classic cars? I said, yeah. I said, I have several of them now, those classic Cadillacs with the big fins.
That's cool.
And he said, I love classic cars too. In fact, I'm going to do, we started talking and we just hit it off.
That's great.
And you know, I had been given 1 hour with him. And to make a long story short, George and I sat there and talked to each other, and I recorded the whole thing. We spent 3.5 hours talking to each other. And the folks from ILM came out and said, George, we've turned off all the lights back there. We're all leaving. You guys are the only ones here in the building. So you have to lock up when you leave. And I ended up doing the longest interview that has ever been done with George. It not only went in issue number 5 of Starlog, the 5th year, but it was so long that I did it in 3 different issues. And I kind of patterned it after his 3 first movies. The first movie was called A New Hope. So the first interview, chapter 1 of the George Lucas interview, was called A New View. And it was looking at George. The second one was The Empire Strikes Back. I titled mine Hollywood Strikes Back. And I did these 3 issues of the magazine to do the 3 interviews with George Lucas, and it sold like incredibly.
What was the third one? The Return of the Auteur?
I can't remember.
It's okay.
I can't remember now.
We can look it up.
Do you have it?
Too many years ago.
Yeah, do you have the magazines?
No, not the magazines.
What?
The recording.
The recordings?
Huh?
Do you have the recordings?
The recordings?
Yeah, you said that you recorded the whole thing.
Oh, I have no idea where those tapes are. They may be in a box around here, because when Tom DeSanto and I went to my home in Austin, when I was trying to get ready to sell it and I was packing up stuff, he went there with me 3 times and we packed up stuff and shipped it back here. So there's a lot of boxes around here, and in my room there's a lot of boxes.
I went to that house and it was incredible. It's not only like a historical, amazing house, but all the stuff that you had, and some of it's here, but there was a lot more.
Oh, I know.
And
I had to say goodbye to a lot of stuff.
I know, and that's, I mean, well, you know, you had things like, you know, you had an estate sale, and I was there, and, you know, you'd look through things like, oh, there's an Isaac Asimov book, open it, personally signed, Kerry, something, you know, just casually, oh, that's cool.
That's true.
You know, you know, such special sort of relics. But I mean, like, what was that? What is it like? I mean, you're 86, you look great. First of all, how do you do it? Second of all, like, I mean, that's tough to, like, yeah, right. I know you're from the future. You're taking some like future meds.
Live long and prosper.
Vulcan juice. Vulcan juice. But like, what is it like saying, like, making the decision, like, okay, I got to part with these artifacts of my life that have colored my life that are amazing? I mean, that can't be fun. Or is it liberating in a way? Is it?
No, neither one. I mean, I had to do it. I didn't have room here in this apartment. I mean, this is a 3-bedroom apartment. I have 2 roommates. So I have only my room and what I've done here in the living room, which is kind of take over and stuff all over the floor with these pictures and stuff. But I had to basically say, okay, I love this house. I've had many wonderful experiences here over the years, but I'm going to have to say goodbye to it. This house is going to provide me with the money I need for the rest of my life. And I have to take the things that I just can't live without and say goodbye to a lot of the stuff that was very dear to me, but I think someone else will enjoy it tremendously also. So we had the estate. I mean, Tom and I packed up everything I couldn't live without, which is quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But
because you're a nostalgic person.
Huh?
Would you describe yourself as nostalgic?
Yes, I would.
Or sentimental?
I would, but there comes a time when you just have to say, I mean, when I moved from New York out here to California, I had to do the same thing. I had to say, okay, what am I going to take with me, and what am I going to just leave here and say goodbye to?
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, that's life. And I love my new life in Hollywood. I mean, I'm here for the rest of my life. And I love living right in the heart of all the craziness here in Hollywood. I mean, it's like living in Times Square in New York, you know?
Yeah, so you're a Hollywood lover. Hollywood gets a lot of, like, you know, flack, I think, and you know, there's a lot. I mean, there's a critic. Everyone's a critic, right? What do you think of the state of like the industry of sci-fi today as it was compared to the past? I mean, are you optimistic about movies, about shows, about where we're going in the entertainment world?
No,
No.
no, because unfortunately, Hollywood has been taken over by a lot of political thinking. And what I used to go to the movies for was inspiration. I would go to the movies and hope by the end of the movie I would walk out inspired and motivated and excited about life and new things that this movie let me see that I hadn't seen. I go to the movies now and I get kind of preached at with a lot of political attitudes and philosophy that I don't agree with and that is not positive to me.
Mm-hmm.
And science fiction is basically about the future. It's about the world of tomorrow, and it's about how that world can be better than today. That's what my friends Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and so many wonderful people that I got to know, they had that positive view of the world of tomorrow. I would love to go to a movie that actually made me excited by what it shows me and that it energized me about the possibilities of the world. But I don't see that in movies nowadays. And we've got to get Hollywood out of this, let's say, left-wing democratic hole that makes them, you know, try to preach to people and try to win over people and try to, you know, tell them something that they want us to learn. And I don't want that kind of preaching at me.
Well, I think movies and entertainment, especially sci-fi, I mean, I think, you know, the original promise of Star Trek was hugely inspirational. I mean, diverse
Absolutely.
cast, you know, it was, you know, there was a lot of doom and gloom sci-fi. This was a future that somehow Earth had solved its conflicts over largely, and we're going out into the stars. And I do think, but also it was entertaining, wasn't overly preachy, you know.
No, but it was positive. I mean,
Right.
look at the crew of the Enterprise.
Yeah.
What Gene Roddenberry did was say, you know, we're all human beings. There is no one right race and all the rest are garbage. We're all human beings. And he put together a crew that was men and women and black and white and purple and green and everything else, you know. He said, we can all get along and do wonderful things because we're all human beings. And we should all enjoy working together and going where no man has gone before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, you know, Gene Roddenberry was a wonderful friend of mine. I met him at a science fiction convention up in Seattle when I was invited as a guest, and Gene was there too. And I went over to him and I said, Gene, I'm Kerry O'Quinn. I'm the publisher of Starlog, and I just wanted to meet you because I really think you did a marvelous thing by creating Star Trek. And he said, well, Kerry, seems like you and I ought to get to know each other. He said, let's have breakfast tomorrow morning. And I said, okay, fine, yes. So we went and we ate outdoors in the sunshine at this little table at a restaurant on the hillside. And within a few minutes of sitting down and talking, Gene and I discovered that we were both Texans. He was born in El Paso. I was born in Austin. We were both Texans. And we discovered that we both had the same birthday. We're both born on August the 19th. different years, but we both have the same birthday. And Gene said, Kerry, clearly you and I are meant to be friends. And from that day on, Gene and I were friends.
That's cool.
And we had wonderful times together. Every time I would come out to LA, I would always go to his office on Paramount, or he invited me to his home. And, you know, I said, Gene, I can't believe that you invited me to your home. You know, it's just so incredible. And he said, Kerry, it's called friendship. And I said, it's that simple. Gene was a marvelous person. And of course, then I got to know Leonard Nimoy. I got to know Nichelle Nichols.
And she was a close friend of yours.
Nichelle and I loved each other.
Yeah.
We were in love with each other.
Yeah.
And George Takei. I mean, I got to know all the folks to do with Star Trek because they were all interesting people, and we got along beautifully.
Mm-hmm. You know, I love Star Trek, and I'm a fan. I don't watch all the new shows, but I watch a lot of them, and Strange New Worlds. You know, one thing though, and I love the J.J. Abrams reboot, but one thing I always think about in the back of my mind, I'm like, Star Trek is about the future, and they keep doing prequels. And I always feel like, because I feel like Next Generation was like such an amazing cast and show and story. I'd like to see Star Trek content that goes, you know, forward. I don't know if you've thought about that at all.
I'm with you.
I mean, like, we've seen a lot of Kirk stories and Spock.
Yeah.
And I keep seeing them. My only critique.
Well, you know, again, one of my reasons that I love science fiction is because it's about the future. And I think all human beings have a vision of what lies ahead and how it can be better. How can my life be better? That's number one, something we should all be concerned about. Our pursuit of happiness, that's what life is all about for every one of us. The pursuit of happiness. How can my pleasures today add up to make me the happiest person I can be? And how can the world be better because everybody is in pursuit of their own happiness and they don't harm each other. We don't initiate the use of force or violence against each other. We're all about our own happiness. And science fiction is the particular category that shows us what the world of tomorrow can be like and how each individual, you, me, all of us, can do things and enjoy things that make life better for all of us and make our own happiness a reality. And I have done that.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone from one pleasure to another, to another, to another, all kinds of things that I've done so that I'm a happy human being now.
Yeah, you really are.
Really
I've known you for many years now, and you've always been a very positive, upbeat guy. Jolly.
Well, that's...
It's like a kid. I mean, you have a kid energy.
Thank you. I really like that, and I think you're right. I mean, I hung on to something that I had as a kid, and I said, there's a way in which I don't want to leave this behind. I want it to be a part of my ongoing life forever.
Yeah, you have such a playful vibe, and I think it resonates through, you know, your career and how you collect friends, you know, how you're kind of down to play. And that's super cool.
Well, I like friends who have the same kind of positive attitude about their own life. And that's why, you know, when I met Ayn Rand.
Oh yeah, I want to know about this. Tell us.
Well, actually, My high school buddy that I made movies with, when I moved to New York, he said, Kerry, I want you to go to this lecture with me next week. And I said, a lecture? That didn't sound like a lot of fun. And I said, what is it? He said, it's philosophy. I said, oh, David, please. I took a philosophy course in college, and I said it was, I said, I'm not interested in it. I said, it's all about, some people believe this, some people believe that. Philosophy is just like a waste of time. And he said, Kerry, I know you very well. And I said, yes, David, you do. And he said, I know you're going to like this. He said, take my word for it and go to this lecture with me, and I promise you, you're going to say afterwards that it was worth your time. I said, fine, I'll go. I went to a lecture. It was in a big meeting hall in a hotel in New York City. And Nathaniel Branden gave the lecture, and it was lecture number 4 in a 20-lecture series called Basic Principles of Objectivism. And lecture number 4 was about the concept of God. Now, I was raised in the Methodist Church, and I went to, Sunday school, and later on I did stuff in church, and I went to church, and I was raised just pretty much like everybody else is, believing, in this invisible, all-powerful God that created everything. And I went to this lecture, and in 2 hours of solid logic and reasoning, Nathaniel Branden basically convinced me that the whole concept of God is against reason and logic and reality. And at the end of that lecture, I said, I can't believe it. He has just changed my mind on such a fundamental issue. And David was right. He said at the end of the lecture, I'd say it was worthwhile. It was not only worthwhile, but I bought a copy of Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's largest book, and I started reading it. It took me 3 months to finish reading it, but I also signed up for the rest of the lectures. And they were on various topics. That was the only lecture that was on God. They were on all kinds of topics for that 20-lecture series. But I had found a source of logic and reasoning and a view of life that I could adhere to and that was inspiring to me and motivating to me, and also got rid of a lot of garbage in my life that I had grown up as a kid kind of accepting without thinking much about it. And so I took courses for several years at the Nathaniel Branden Institute. And I eventually started working with them. I started designing a lot of their brochures and their flyers and a lot of the stuff that they needed a designer for. I was their art director, so to speak. And I designed 4 book covers that Ayn Rand got published. And I worked with her to design exactly what she wanted on the cover. And eventually they moved into the Empire State Building in the basement, and they had this big office there with a huge auditorium, and they would do lectures in the auditorium. And they started a film series called The Romantic Screen. And they knew that I was interested in movies and film, so they asked me to run the film series for them. And I not only ran it, but on my animation stand, I created about a 30-second opening logo, just like you see in the movies. You see the Leo the Lion growl at the beginning of a movie, or you see 20th Century Fox spotlights. I created a logo for the Nathaniel Branden Institute for the Romantic Screen, and each week I would actually cut the 16mm film and put this on the beginning so that it would open the movie. And then, of course, at the end, I would splice it back and get rid of it and send it back to the people where we, got the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ran the romantic screen, and I just worked with them on a lot of different things. And eventually I became very good friends with Nathaniel Brandon, Barbara Brandon, and a lot of the people that worked there. And when Nathaniel and Barbara moved out here, they had divorced, so they were not together anymore. But Barbara became one of my favorite dates, and very often she and I were invited over to Nathaniel's home to have dinner with him and his new wife, and we would go over there. So I had a wonderful life that came out of David forcing me to go to that one lecture that destroyed God. And I'm very much a believer in reality, in facts, no faith. Faith is a belief in something without any proof. That's what faith is. Mm-hmm. And I have no faith in anything. I have confidence in things that I have reason to have confidence in. But reason and logic are the two things that guide me exclusively as I go through life now. And that's one of the reasons I've accomplished some of the things I've accomplished, and definitely one of the reasons I'm the happy human that I am.
I've only read one Ayn Rand book, her shortest one, Anthem.
Anthem, I love. You see that?
I love Anthem. Oh yeah.
That's my billboard poster for Anthem.
That's cool. Anthem's amazing.
I
you
love
can read it in an afternoon.
It's science fiction.
Yeah, and it's written in a really interesting way.
That's my artwork, by the way.
Is it? This is you.
Oh yeah. Kerry's not bad.
No, you're a very talented artist.
Damn right. I've won prizes in Texas for painting.
Mm-hmm.
So are you interested in making a cover variant for us for the Wolf Search?
I have quite a few things around here artwork that I've done. If you go into the bathroom there's two paintings there that are mine, and I have quite a few things that I've done.
Yeah.
I for years I loved painting. I was damn good at it.
He's asking if you would do a variant cover of our comic.
We just learned that this is the thing what comic people do. It's amazing.
Well, interesting. I still have an easel set up in my bedroom.
Really?
But I haven't painted for years. Mm-hmm. So I mean,
okay.
I've done it. I loved it.
We'll just take this.
Good at it. But and that, by the way, Ayn Rand said that Anthem doesn't have a plot in the strict sense of the term. And I agree with her. And I have gone through the book and I have done things to that little story to give it a plot and to do things that would make it into a wonderful movie. And now this is the kind of movie that I think should be done, because it's a very positive movie.
It is a very positive story
about a civilization where the word I has been outlawed.
And me, and the whole book is written without like individual words, like so it's a very like kind of jarring read.
It's all
there's only we,
it's all
us,
the community and not the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals are not regarded in that community. Anyway,
and I won't spoil it, but it's very emotionally satisfying just getting through the book because of the style. I mean, it's very experimental.
I agree.
And adapting that into a film would be really interesting. How do you? I mean, there's a lot of experimentation to be had in how you tell that story cinematically.
Well, I agree, and I've worked on it for years. In fact, I did a kind of a treatment of the whole movie, not a shooting script, but it has a lot of script.
I really want to check that out.
And Barbara Brandon, who wrote Ayn Rand's biography and who was very close to her for many years and who did a lot of the lectures at NBI. And as I say, Barbara and I became very good friends. And she read a lot of the stuff that I had to do with Anthem. And she said, Kerry, I think you are the man who was born to make Anthem into a movie.
Cool.
And I would love to, before I die, see Anthem made into a movie because I think it would be a huge hit, not just because it's Ayn Rand, because she doesn't have that much of an audience these days, but also because it's positive, it has drama, it has a lot of conflict to it, but at the end, you are elevated. And that's
I agree.
what I want movies to do for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So was she the greatest influence on your life?
The greatest what?
Influence.
Philosophically, yes. She said, I don't need anything beyond what she taught with Objectivism. It was all based on reason and logic. And she, every branch of philosophy, I mean, there are 4 branches of philosophy. The first has to do with reality. It's called metaphysics. The second has to do with knowledge. The third has to do with well, anyway.
We'll research it and post it on the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, I learned a lot about philosophy, and.
But was she the greatest writer you ever met? Or
I don't know if she's the greatest writer because there have been a lot of very good writers, but she certainly was good at taking her philosophy and turning it into dramatic situations with characters. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read The Fountainhead, which was a book that she wrote, and she actually did the screenplay for that movie that starred Gary Cooper and Patricia Neal and Raymond Massey. That movie was made, I think, in 1949. I've forgotten exactly when it was done, but she did the screenplay for that, and it's about an architect, a very unique, individualistic architect who's fighting the system. And again, it's very inspiring. The movie is marvelous. And Max Steiner did the score for that. I mean, it's a wonderful movie with a lot of great people involved in it.
So was she open to hang out with people like you? Like, did you spend time with her, like, together?
Well, we didn't become good friends or anything like that. I just worked with her and everything. She was very concerned with her philosophy and the lectures, and she would at the Nathaniel Brandon or Barbara Brandon or Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan taught me economics in a free society. Alan Blumenthal taught me about music. I mean, there were a lot of different lectures on a lot of different topics that were all based on her philosophy of objectivism. And so she pretty much stayed with her husband, Frank O'Connor, who was also an artist. And I got to know him better than I did her, actually. But I knew her, and I worked with her, and I became friends with the Brandons and a lot of other people involved in that organization. But it was all about kind of getting the knowledge that I needed to have the life that I wanted to have. And it was a positive life in every way that got me where I wanted to go and gave me the feelings that I wanted to enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
So was she a regular reader of Starlog or Fangoria? Do you know?
No. No.
She was on her own track.
No. I don't think she would have. gotten into those. She was very kind of intellectual.
Yeah.
So we have to wrap it up in a second, but I want to ask you for one more story.
Okay.
The Arthur C. Clarke story, Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
So Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001 Space Odyssey
Yes.
and many other things. So
Do you want to know how I met him?
all right,
or-
tell me how you met him and then the Sri Lanka story.
I'll try to make this as quick as possible.
Okay.
But I was a huge, again, my friend David that made me go to the Ayn Rand lecture, he and I were Eclipse fans. We had traveled to Norfolk, Virginia, and several other places. I went to places around the world to see solar eclipses. And one of the things, we did a show down in Norfolk. We did some video. We took pictures and did a little 8mm film. We put together a little show about our eclipse voyage, our eclipse, adventure. And a man saw it who had chartered the largest ship in the world, passenger ship, the Queen Elizabeth II. I've forgotten how many, it's like almost 3,000 passengers or something. And he had chartered that for an eclipse voyage in a couple of years. It was going to sail out into the Atlantic for the longest eclipse possible. But he had another little eclipse cruise that was going on this year, and he was in charge of that. And there were going to be scientists and astronauts and all kinds of interesting people on board. And he saw our little movie and he said, Kerry, I want you to come on board this eclipse cruise, and I want you to make a movie about it that I can use to promote the big QE2 eclipse in 2 years. And so I did that. And we made a 1-hour documentary called Voyage to Darkness. And it was shown at the Hayden Planetarium in New York. And they said, this is the best film we have ever seen in terms of capturing all the details of a solar eclipse. And it was so successful. I still have that movie, by the way. We showed it at Tom's house a few years ago. Yeah. And people were blown away by it. But
I want to see it.
It was so successful that the cruise ship for the next year completely sold out months in advance. And he came to me and he said, Kerry, there's still more people that want to go, but the ship is sold out. So I'm going to charter a second Cunard ship. This one is only going to hold about, 450 people. I've forgotten how many exactly. But he said, I want you to be in charge of the program on that ship. And I said, Phil, I've never done anything like that. I don't know what to do. He said, Kerry, no one's ever done it. But he said, I've seen you organize a movie and do such a good job. I know you can do this. And I said, okay, fine. So he said, the only thing is, he said, there's going to be astronauts. There's going to be scientists in all different fields, and they'll be giving lectures every day all over the ship. It's going to be an educational cruise. And it'll end, the climax will be that 5-minute eclipse in the middle of the Atlantic. But he said, your passenger that's going to be your main problem is Arthur C. Clarke. He said his movie, 2001, A Space Odyssey, it just came out a couple of years ago, and he's famous, and he's kind of a celebrity, and he said he's very intellectual, and he said he's going to be your main problem. So the first day on the ship, Arthur was giving a speech called Life in the Year 2001. This was in 1968, I think. And I had never met him, but I went and stood at the back of the room as he talked. And he was talking about how science was going to make life better for the whole human race, how it was going to basically bring different countries together, different races together. It was going to basically make us all friends and let us stop fighting each other and having wars and that sort of thing. Science was going to cure the complications and the all of the problems in the human race. Anyway, I was so inspired by what he said that I started crying. And I said, this is the man who's going to be my biggest problem. And he has just made me weep tears listening to him and his talk about the world of tomorrow and how wonderful it can be. And I met Arthur. We became friends. We actually watched the eclipse several days later. We were both on the captain's bridge together, and we were marvelous friends. Whenever he came over to New York, we would always get together and spend time together. When he was doing his sequel to 2001, 2010, when he was doing that out here in LA, I came out here in LA and he took me on the set, introduced me to everybody and all that. And then he was living in Sri Lanka. And he said, I want you to come visit me in Sri Lanka. I said, I don't know anything about that country. I mean, what is there? So anyway, I did a little research and looked. I said, why is the man who envisions the world of tomorrow living in Sri Lanka? That seems kind of a backward thing to do. But I went over there and I spent a couple of weeks. He put me up in a hotel. And the very first day I arrived, I went to his home. And his assistant showed me into his office. And I walked into this room, and there's big pictures of him with political people and movie stars all over the wall. I mean, Arthur knew everybody. And he's sitting behind his desk to greet me, and he's wearing a full head gorilla mask from the opening of 2001. And I walked up to the desk. And I said, Arthur, I have traveled halfway around the planet Earth to be here. And this is the way one of the great minds of the 20th century greets me, with a gorilla mask. I said, are you ever going to grow up? And in his crisp British accent, he said, Kerry, I'm not planning on it. And I said, that's why you and I are going to be friends, because neither one of us is ever going to grow up. We're going to stay youthful. And sure enough, he took off the mask and he said, I wrote you a little greeting here. And he handed me a piece of paper. And I can't remember the whole thing. I still have it. A little piece of paper that said, there once was a man named O'Quinn who traveled the world seeking all kinds of sin. And it went on and on. And it was very funny. He knew me very well. And it's a marvelous little greeting that he gave me. And that was my relationship with Arthur C. Clarke, who is Sir Arthur C. Clarke. So anyway, I mean, he was just one of many amazing people that I've known in my lifetime. Fortunately, I mean, Gene Roddenberry and just all kinds of people. And fortunately, I've known a lot of the people that I admire and that I've grown to love as friends.
No, that's amazing. And that's a great story to end on, I think.
Okay.
And but for next time we can get into what the sin part that he's referring to. So I mean, we have to have a cliffhanger
Well, he ended up saying with that, I can't remember the rhyme or anything, but he ended up saying that whenever I got to where I was going to find some sin, I found that the church had already beat me there, and had eliminated the sin possibility. So the church was my enemy, and he knew that about me too.
Well,
Okay.
No, that's amazing. And yeah, thank you so much. You have
Thank you.
such a story career and life. And yeah, thank you so much. This is awesome.
Well, you're very welcome. I love kind of going back over a lot of this because at my age, you have a lot of wonderful memories. And that's one of the things I enjoy about life these days is bringing those memories back and, savoring them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're lucky. So
Thank you for
All right.
sharing it with us.
thank you.
Loved it.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Great. And that's it.
That's it.
Yeah,
Bye.
that's it.
Oh.
Wolf's back.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for tuning into the Wolf Pack.
Yeah.
We'll be back soon. Okay.
And this is a
There's
little
a
note
Gassimo.
that said, I would like to congratulate you on your editorial on the 3 Mile Island incident in the July 1979 Future Life. It was far and away the most sensible analysis of the situation I have seen, and that includes my own.